Well, this is awkward. No one asked for this video, nor have I ever done a video like this before where I actually talk. But today I'm going to be ranking every UFC pay-per-view in 2024 from worst to best. And I'm going to be going based on hype, based on how the card looked on paper, and just how the card was overall. And I'm mostly going to be talking about the main card here rather than the entire card, as it's really just the main card that's on pay-per-view. But some cards I will cheat a little bit and talk about the prelims. But here we go. Here's all my rankings of all the cards of 2024. Starting off at number 14, the worst card of the year was UFC 309, Jones versus Miocic. This was just an awful card. Now, even on paper, this wasn't the greatest card, but in real life, man, it was even worse. The prelims I'm not really going to talk about. They were all right. We got some good finishes on the card. Some of these fights got cancelled, as you can see up on the screen. The card opened with Mauricio Ruffy versus some guy. It was alright, I guess. Then we got some shitty women's fight, which I didn't pay attention to. Then we get to the feature fight. Stop putting Bo Nickel on main cards. It's one thing that they put him as a card opener for a lot of these cards, but now you put him on the feature fight of an MSG card. The co-main event between Chandler and Oliveira was alright. It wasn't as fun as their first fight, but I mean, it's better than the rest of this shit on this card. And then the main event between Jones and Stipe was just awful. We all know it should have been Tom Aspinall in there. And on top of all of it being just a bad main event, Stipe looked completely washed, like he had no business being in there. His punches took fucking 5 business days to land, and Jones got a free win, and now you have all these Jones nuthuggers going, "Oh, but he's the pound-for-pound number one. Put him as the pound-for-pound." That was not a pound-for-pound worthy performance, and honestly, if he comes in looking like that, I think Aspinall slumps him. Honestly, I think even Pereira has a good shot to beat him. But yeah, overall, just not a good card. And the fact that this was an MSG card on top of that, considering the MSG cards we got in the past, like UFC 281, UFC 205, UFC 217, hell, I'll even take UFC 232 over this shit. I mean, 230, whatever. But yeah, overall, not a good card. Next up, at number 13, we have UFC 297, Strickland versus Duplessis, and my god, this card was just as bad. And if it wasn't for the main event, this might have been at the bottom. This card was just an absolute drag to get through, especially that co-main event. Here's live footage of me and my friend watching that fight. But anyway, overall, this was just not a memorable card. The card opened up with Arnold Allen versus Movsar Evloev. It was an alright fight, but the only thing memorable was that illegal knee, which bitch-ass Movsar Evloev milked, which turns out it wasn't even illegal. The only reason he got away with it was because the ref fucked up. Then we had Chris Curtis versus some guy. I can't even remember that fight. I tried my hardest to care, but honestly, I just gave up halfway through. Then we had the feature fight, which was Neil fucking Magny versus Mike Malott. We get one finish on the card, and it was from Neil Magny. And that's another thing. Every single fight ended in a decision, and the one finish ended like fucking 15 seconds before. I'm not even going to go on about the co-main event because it was just an absolute drag to get through. And then the main event was actually kind of cool. I know a lot of people give Strickland shit for being a boring fighter, but this was actually a good fight. Even Duplessis, a lot of people don't give him his credit. He's actually an entertaining champion. He brings it every time. And even though Strickland can be boring, he's not as boring as people make him out to be. I'd rather watch him fight than Adesanya fight. But yeah, overall, this was just not a good card and not a good start to the year. I can understand why even Dana said that this was a shitty card. Next up at number 12, we have UFC 302, Makhachev versus Poirier, and once again, this was an absolute shitty card. This card was a drag to get through, but was saved by the main event. Some of these cards in 2024 are being carried by the main event. But anyway, having a look at the card, like I said, the main event between Makhachev and Poirier was pretty fun. I was expecting a pretty one-sided fight that would end early, but thankfully that didn't happen, because that would have been a shitty end to a shitty card. The co-main event between Strickland and Costa sucked. I guess I probably shouldn't have expected a good fight, but whatever. And this fight did not need to be 5 rounds. The feature fight between Kevin Holland and Oleg Zaitchik, who cares? I mean, it was a cool finish, but can we stop putting Kevin Holland on main cards? Lol, Morono versus Price, I didn't even watch. I was up getting food while that fight happened. And then the card opener between Aleske dos Santos and Brown was pretty boring. I didn't watch any of the prelims, but from what I saw, Jailton Almeida had the best performance on this card. You know it's bad when he is the one who gets performance of the night. But yeah, overall, UFC 302 just was not a good card. I was hyped for it, but it just did not deliver. It was an absolute drag to get through. Next up at number 11, we have UFC 307, Pereira versus Roundtree Jr., and once again, we have another card being carried by the main event. Pereira honestly carried UFC in 2024, but yeah, let's just take a look at this card. Now, I'm going to start before by saying that I didn't actually watch this card live. I was actually overseas when this card happened, and it was on at like 3 a.m. over there. And I'm glad I did miss it for the most part up until the main event, because this card was not worth sitting through. For starters, we had Kevin Holland on the main card. Again, can we stop putting him on main cards, I swear to God. And yet they chucked Buckley on the prelims versus Wonderboy. We had Kayla Harrison on the main card, which I was kind of alright with, because Kayla Harrison's one of the few good female fighters, but she did not deliver in this fight. Don't even get me started on Aldo versus Batista. The co-main event, I tuned in when the co-main event was ending, and apparently it was a robbery, but I did not go back to watch it. But the main event, holy shit. In my opinion, that was fight of the year. Like, that was just a back and forth war. Pereira entered the Matrix in round 4, and holy shit, he put on a masterclass. A lot of people, myself included, thought Roundtree had no chance, so he made it a good fight and gave a good account of himself. And I hate to be that one guy, but I still think it should have been Ankalaev in there. But it is funny seeing how the UFC won't make that fight and won't give Ankalaev the shot. But it's got to be Ankalaev next and no one else, and then we'll see Pereira move up to heavyweight. Speaking of Alex Pereira, next at number 10, we have UFC 303, Pereira versus Prohaska 2. Another fucking card that was carried by the main event. Now, originally, this was supposed to be the Conor card, and a lot of people were saying it was going to be shit, but looking at it, you've got Jamal Hill and Carl Solberg in the co-main event, and Ian Gary versus MVP as the opener, as well as McGregor. On paper, this actually isn't that bad of a card. But anyway, let's take a look at the real card we got. So like I mentioned, the card opened up with MVP versus Ian Gary, which I was actually kind of hyped for, but man, the fight ended up sucking. Then we had Mario Bueno Silva versus some lesbian. That fight ended in a premature stoppage. No one remembers it. Next, we had the on-paper GOAT Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze. Another on-paper win for Anthony Smith. The co-main event, which on screen says Ortega versus Lopez, but it was Ige versus Lopez. I mean, it was alright considering that they threw it together in a matter of hours. And then the main event, of course, was fucking awesome. Pereira put on a masterclass against Yuri Prohaska. I was expecting kind of a competitive fight, but I kind of knew Pereira would win again, given that Yuri is just too goddamn hittable. But considering they threw the fight together on 2 weeks' notice, the main event was pretty sick, I will say that. But yeah, I'll give this card a pass because it was short notice or whatever. But yeah, overall, just wasn't that good of a card. Especially that feature fight. That was just a drag to get through. Anyway, coming in at number 9, we have UFC 301, Pantoja versus Usyk. Now, a lot of people were shitting on this card leading up to it, especially the main event. But I was actually somewhat hyped for it. Mainly because I'm Aussie, so I was backing Steve Usyk to win. But also, it wasn't that bad of a card. I mean, every single fight on the main card was ranked. Kind of. I mean, Michelle Pereira versus Ihor Potieria wasn't ranked. But yeah, we had Paul Craig versus Kaya Borralho, which ended in a KO in the second round. Michelle Pereira versus Ihor Potieria, which ended in the first round. And Anthony on paper Smith versus Vitor Petrino, where Anthony Smith on paper actually showed up. So yeah, up until the co-main event, all the fights were finishes, so the card moved pretty quickly. The co-main event between Aldo and Martinez was pretty fun, and then the main event was actually pretty sick. Everyone calls Pantoja a boring fighter, but he's actually not that bad. And a lot of people were crying robbery after the fight, but personally I thought Pantoja did enough to win, and I was backing Usyk to win. But overall, it was actually a pretty good card. So yeah. Coming in at number 8, we have UFC Noche, or UFC 306, O'Malley versus Dvalishvili at the Sphere. There was a lot of buzz. I mean, kind of, if that's whatever you want to call it, around this card. But yeah, overall on paper, this wasn't a great card. I mean, you had fucking Ode Osborne on the main card. It turned out to be a great fight, but it did not belong on the main card. Zellhuber versus Rubovich, which was fight of the year if you ask me, even though it really had no place being on the main card, especially a card like the Sphere. Then we had the feature fight with Ortega versus Lopez. Great fight. And then we had that god-awful co-main event between Grasso and Shevchenko. Can we just ban women's MMA, like, as a whole? Can we stop? Like, yeah. Anyway, and then the main event, O'Malley versus Dvalishvili. Nothing more satisfying than seeing Sean O'Malley lose. The UFC for years have been trying to force him down our throats. He's a manufactured star. They need to stop pushing him. They need to stop cramming him down our throats and trying to tell us he's a star, because he is not. So yeah, it was pretty satisfying seeing him lose and seeing the UFC's plans blow up in their face, because you know they wanted O'Malley to win that. Even Dana White was talking shit about Merab a few weeks before the fight. But yeah, the UFC need to go back to the Sphere, because I know they have the money, according to Dana White at least. I mean, according to him, Power Slap makes fucking mountains of cash, so go back to the Sphere, but this time, put an actual star in the main event. Like, do Alex Pereira versus somebody, or even John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Just go back to the fucking Sphere, Dana and Hunter. Next up, we have UFC 310 Pantoja versus Asakura, the most recent pay-per-view. I ain't gonna lie, this card was actually pretty stacked. The co-main event was cool, and even the prelims were actually pretty stacked. But we'll take a look at the card, and as you can see, it was actually a pretty solid card. The main event was pretty fun. It ended at a finish. Co-main event was a little underwhelming, but it was fun. The Gunn versus Volkov fight, despite the robbery, it was pretty fun. Kron Gracie gets fucking flatlined, which is what they get for putting him on the main card. Landwehr versus Do Hoi Choi was fun. Anthony Smith got another on-paper victory. Luke absolutely dusts Themba Garimba. The Rock's gonna want that house back, little bro. Evloev and Sterling happened. Brian Battle won a close decision. And Chris Weidman got fucking finished. But yeah, overall it was actually a pretty good card. Next up, we have UFC 304. Edwards versus Muhammad 2. My GOAT, Bilal Muhammad, absolutely dog walks Leon Edwards to win the welterweight title after everyone was doubting him. It was so satisfying to see. But anyway, like I said, main event between Edwards and Muhammad. Oh yeah, you can say it was boring, but come on. Bilal Muhammad dunked Leon Edwards' boring ass right on his bald spot and took all of his aura. Co-main event, Tom Aspinall officially became John Jones' daddy, knocks out Curtis Blades in 1 minute. The feature fight between Green and Pimlet was pretty cool. Duncan versus Rodriguez was Allen versus Chikadze was pretty fun. Fucking Molly McCann gets fraud checked by an absolute bomb. Muhammad Makai versus Mel Cap happened. Yeah. Anyway. Alright, looks like we're at top 5 now. UFC 305, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. Honestly, a lot better than what I was expecting. Normally, the UFC gives us Australians some of the shittiest cards known to existence, but here, the card they gave us was actually pretty fun. The main event, we had Chad Dricus du Plessis destroy Gisrael Gainosanya by submitting him in round 4. Fun to watch. I still can't believe people actually thought Adesanya was going to win, coming off a Sean Strickland loss and a layoff. Co-main event, we had that ugly-ass dwarf Kai Kara France KO Steve Erceg. Sad day. Feature fight, we had Mateus Gamrot versus Dan Hooker, and holy shit, this was actually a good fight. I was expecting this to be a typical Gamrot fight where he just spams takedowns, rinse, repeat, you know. We had Tai Tuivasa versus Jairzinho Rosenstruck, and man, this is just getting embarrassing for Tai. And then, of course, we had Li Jingliang versus Carlos Prates, where Prates KO'd Li Jingliang, first to knock him out. Overall, actually a pretty good card. Way better than I thought it was going to end up being. Coming in at number 4, we have UFC 298, Volkanovski versus Topuria, which was actually a pretty sick card. There was actually some hype for this. I was pretty hyped for this. I didn't get the chance to watch the whole main card live because it was my sister's birthday. But anyway, if we take a look at the card, we got the main event, Volk versus Topuria, which was actually a pretty fun main event. I was hyped for it. It was the only fight I got to watch live. and it ended in a devastating knockout for Topuria, which I called. To be honest, I don't see how many people didn't see this coming. Co-main event, the fight between Paulo Costa and Robert Whittaker was fucking sick. I don't know how that didn't get fight of the night over fucking Lemos versus Dern, but anyway. Neil versus Gary, it was whatever. A lot of people say it was boring, but it wasn't that bad. Morale versus Cejudo was pretty fun. And then Hernandez versus Kopylov as well was a pretty good fight. So overall, pretty sick main card, even if the Ian Gary fight was kind of eh. But anyway. Alright, now we're in the top 3. Coming in at number 3 is UFC 308, Topuria versus Holloway. One of my most hyped cards for the year, I think, for everyone as well. The main event was fire, the co-main event was fire. The card as well underneath it was pretty good. I didn't tune into any of the prelims, but if we take a look at the card, it was actually pretty stacked. Anyway, in the main event, we had Holloway versus Topuria. A lot of people were surprisingly going with Holloway, probably just because they don't like Topuria, but the fight was fun while it lasted, and it ended in a devastating knockout once again for Topuria. The co-main event between Whittaker and Chimaev. Again, a lot of people were calling with Whittaker. I was one of the, well, I wouldn't say the few, but I went with Chimaev on this one. Even though I kind of predicted it to happen, it was kind of weird seeing him ragdoll Robert Whittaker like that. Next in the feature fight, we had Big Ank versus Rakic, which was it was alright. Would have been better if we had Garn Volkov on the card. Murphy versus Ige was fun, and then we had Shara Bullet versus whoever the fuck this guy is. Pretty sick knockout. Overall, pretty good card. Top 3 for sure, mostly because of the main and co-main, but yeah, the card was just a fun watch overall. It was worth waking up at 5 AM Australian time to watch it. Coming in at number 2, a card which I think people have kind of forgotten about it, is UFC 299 O'Malley versus Vera. Now, if we were just talking about main cards, this could honestly be number 1, but because we're going to cheat a little and go over the prelims just for these last 2, I'm going to have UFC 299 at the number 2 spot rather than 1. But anyway, the main event, we had O'Malley versus Vera. Undeserved title shot, but I was still kind of hyped for it. It was a fun fight, even if Vera got his ass whooped. The co-main event was also pretty hype. We had Poirier versus Benoit Saint Denis. A lot of people, myself included, were picking Benoit to win, and, well, Poirier went out there and kind of fraud-checked him. The feature fight, we had Kevin Holland versus Michael Venom Page. Again, you know how I feel about Kevin Holland on main cards, but I don't know, I feel like this one was the exception. Next, we had Gilbert Burns versus my boy, Jack Della Maddalena. Jack Della gets a pretty vicious KO in round 3, right as he was probably about 40 seconds away from losing. The main card opener, of course, was Song Yadong versus Petr Yan. We were in desperate need of a Petr Yan win, and man, he pulled this shit out of the fire. But my favorite moment from this card was on the prelims. Curtis Blades knocking out this boring-ass crotch sniffer Gelton Almeida with hammer fists as he's diving in for a takedown. That probably just set the tone for this card. After that, this card was just banger after banger after banger. Not one boring fight on the main card. But I still can't put it at number 1 over the number 1 pick, which you probably already know what it is. And of course, a number 1 pick. Did anyone expect it to be anything else? UFC 300 Pereira versus Hill. Now, it's kind of funny, because when this card was announced, a lot of us, myself included, were kind of unhappy with this card, particularly the main event, particularly with fucking Bo Nickel being on the main card. But anyway, the whole card was just stacked, top to bottom, well, almost. Anyway, card opened up with Garbrandt versus Figueiredo. Good fight. Green versus Miller. Great fight. A little sad to see Jim Miller get beat like that. Andrade versus Rodriguez, skip. Turner versus Moicano. Upset of the card, honestly. Turner fucking fumbled that finish, man. Youssef versus Lopez. Great fight. Holm versus Harrison. Actually good for a women's fight. Cater versus Sterling. It was alright. Yuri versus Rakic, which in my opinion was the best fight on the card, and honestly should have been on the main card. Fucking Bo Nickel versus Cody Bumdidge as the card opener. Why can't we just get fucking Bo Nickel and Kevin Holland to fight each other? Then that way we can stop wasting 2 separate spots on 2 separate main cards. Anyway, Charles Oliveira versus Arman Sarukian. Now this is where the fun began. Sick fight. Gaethje versus Holloway. Crazy ass knockout. Wasn't expecting Holloway to win. Yan Jianan versus Zhang Weili. It was fun while it lasted. And then, of course, the main event, which, when it was announced, I was kind of unhappy. I mean, I was happy to see Pereira fighting, but I just thought, against Jamal Hill, I really wish they'd just done the Adesanya trilogy when it was announced, but looking back at it, I'm actually kind of happy they did this. We got to see Jamal Hill's fat ass get slumped out cold, and he's been bitching on Twitter ever since. But overall, this was just a phenomenal card from start to finish. I started watching probably around the mid prelims. I think it was around Holly Holm, Kayla Harrison. But yeah, once this fight got started, it was just banger after banger after banger. Overall, just probably the best card of the year. Probably the best card of all time. However, if we're just talking main cards, I still think UFC 217 was better. Because UFC 300 did have a mech co-main and had Bo Nickel as the card opener. But yeah, honestly, I wish they just did this card in the Sphere instead of doing O'Malley versus Marab. Like, it would have been much more worth the time. But yeah, overall, UFC 300, number one pay-per-view of 2024. Well, that's the end of the video, guys. And I might be making more videos like this in the future, depending how this one goes. Maybe I'll rank pay-per-view events of past years. Maybe I'll do other tier lists and other ranking videos. But yeah, hope you enjoy the video. Hope I didn't stutter too much. Subscribe, arseholes. Hashtag all hail the Marlin Army. You name it. I'll see you in a future video, maybe.